Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the panelists, the insights that they gave concerning the data. I have some two things. I wanted to bring in the aspect of regional integration in data, because I think as we work towards having authentic data across the continent, we also have to work towards harmonizing this data, but also being able to use data across countries, because disaster does not affect one country. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 countries at a time. So we need to come up with a strategy of how to harmonize data. It should be a combination of modernizing the systems that we have, but also harmonizing. And this is sort of a 3-pronged sort of approach, whereby we have the hardware, the software, and the orgware, where the hardware is about instrumentation. That means equipping the weather systems, the weather centers, etc. We have the software, where it's about the personnel, equipping them with the right sort of education training to be able to cope with this modernization that's coming up. But also the orgware, where we look into the institution itself, the institutions, way down to the cascading all the way down to the users. So these 3 have to be looked into as a set to be able to cope with this data thing we're talking about. Now, coming to the insurance, particularly to disasters, is in Africa has been very difficult. I don't know how much Mr. Patel will tell us how much this insurance disaster, the facility itself, the insurance facility, has penetrated in Africa. The major stumbling block here, I see, is the premium that we talked about, because I don't see many farmers being ready to pay premium when, I mean, they can't cope with that. They don't have that capacity. But what you talked about, which is very important, and I see it being sort of an opening to insurance, to crops and etc., is using the institutions that we have on the ground. And these I see is like collective insurance being taken by farmers, by farmer associations or groups. You know, instead of working individually, it's something that should be taken in a sort of a collective manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Some other comments or reflection, questions?
So I'm Abse Jigma from Burkina Faso, CEO of Abse Solar. My question here is related to the informal sector, the vulnerables. I catch the opportunity that we have a minister in the panel. How do we deal with those people who was our engine of our economies? In some countries, they represent up to 90% of the GDP, but they never been considered. We hosted a side event yesterday in this room with the Minister of Ghana, who's very also involved in the disaster risk reduction. We're working together on that purpose. And I would like to invite you to think on policies, because if we don't have the political will, it will be difficult. And as a Ministry of Finance, I think you really need to, together with the private sector, of course, and involving those groups of people who's informal by default. And sometimes even this word, I think we need, together with the Minister of Ghana, we're saying that we need to find another word, because the informal sector is also always linked to illegality. The mama who's selling her mangoes, or the man who fishing, I don't see the illegality. He just a one-man business guy or business lady. So we need to find a way to improve, to upgrade those people, because it's, if we want to mobilize the local resources, we need to find a way forward. And I really invite it, and it's resilience. All of this is linked. It's really linked. And one of the examples that we have together with UNDP is the multifunctional platforms. I have been in Senegal 2 weeks ago in the countryside behind Thiès. The women with the multifunctional platforms, what I've seen with my, what I've learned regarding the disaster risk reduction, I advise them to build better and protect the machines that they have. That is something that we will integrate with UNDP, with what we call within the risk informed. That's very important. But again, our informal sector, we really need to put it on the table. And the coming months, I will contact you with the support of Margaret. I'm part of the private sector group and within UNISDR. We have been in Sendai, and as I said in Sendai, I really invite all of the Minister of Finance to implement the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. We need to be human-centered. If we're human-centered, economic growth will follow. It's very important. And just an example for the climate, for the data. The indicators doesn't come from us. We are the people who need to give the metrics to help the insurance sector to design the portfolio product who will be adapted to our needs. Sometimes it's not always adapted and it's not flexible. And our culture also in Africa, we're living in communities. Then cooperative is something who's better adapted to us. If I take the example, for instance, in the winery in the south of France, they organize themselves because one example, the insurance company didn't follow, but they use in the past decades the examples that they have that they insure each other within the same basket. The insurance didn't help them, and they're going back to there. And you know that also. Those are the things that I would like the insurance sector to think about. Thank you.
Well, okay, so a little bit of a reflection and a question. The question actually is very related to this. Yes, I'm sorry?
Can you say who you are?
Yes, of course, it's Maria Gonzalez. I also work in the Ministry of Finance in Mexico. And one of the questions has to do with this last comment on communities giving information, and the fact that not all the data that is required to insure ourselves from different types of risks is necessarily the same. And also the comment by the representative of the World Bank about the fact that there may be a lot of low-hanging fruit. There are a lot of applications that can be piloted in which people may actually have an interest in providing the data themselves to report information that actually implies collecting, identifying risks. And I'm just going to give an example that is not entirely related to this, but there is this application that is very popular, at least in Mexico, called Waze. And what it does is it has a map, and people are reporting into the application because it's in their own interest that perhaps there is a hole in the street, or there is a policeman and it may catch you if you're speeding up, and there is a lot of traffic, and people are registering into the application the problems they are seeing. And actually, I think this has made Waze much more attractive for users compared to Google Map, in which you just have the map and you basically are not getting any information about the environment. So I am wondering whether this type of framework or idea can be used, especially as in many communities, financial inclusion through mobile phones is starting to pick up. And the second question I would have for the panelists is to what extent they really feel that so much data gathering is needed, because after all, you do have some schemes that are more parametric. I mean, you know that if you have a disaster of certain magnitude, you already can cover it. So, I mean, not all risks and not all levels of risk need to be covered in the same way. And I think there is a lot of opportunity to make a combination of different methods to do this coverage. So, this balance, I think needs to be taken into consideration. So.
That's excellent. So we had one more person. Please go ahead. Please.
No, the issue that I wanted to raise, I think, has been addressed by her, because I was saying that, there is a saying now that the coverage of mobile phones is probably much greater than the coverage of sanitary facilities, including toilets in Africa. And therefore, how can the member states, governments, be able to partner with the telephone operators as a direct public-private partnership to be able to deliver the information on disaster risk or risk resilience with the telephone operators, to be able to make sure that this information reaches to the people who need to use it? I think, to me, that there's opportunity there, because right now we have a lot of initiatives, including M-Pesa, that Kenya has done, and it has been able to make sure that banking is more accessible, including to the person who does not know where a bank is, but at least can do some banking activities. So this is an opportunity where we can actually make sure that if governments or the meteorological organizations can partner with the telephone operators, I'm sure they should be able to deliver some very critical information on risk resilience.
Can I just check who you are?
My name is Charles Akol. I work with the ECA.
Good, thank you. And we have a triangle of community, which is individuals, and it can be a community in New York City, and it can be a community in a rural area in Mauritania, but just a group of people that identify themselves as having a common interest. And then we have something we call the private sector, which is business, but it's also a whole lot of other things, obviously. Sometimes we have a terminological issue here. We call everything that is not government private sector, but that's the rest of us, so to speak. But we also have business, and I haven't heard enough about the role of business yet. And then we have the governments, of course. So this is the triangle within which your questions and your opportunities are identified. So I will insist a bit with the panelists to address this public-private as in business and government. What are the experiences, and are they sufficiently beneficial to both parties that they are worthwhile building on, or do we require a lot more innovation and maybe a help in this triangle to make it more purposeful? Because there is a lot of tiptoeing around this. Plus then there are questions about penetration insurance, the informal sector, the production of informal sector on supply lines, the small businesses as communities, but also women, I think you mentioned, the sustainability of local economies, and again, how to use data in a much more interesting way. And in case any of the panelists feel tempted, I'd like to put in here the fact that there is not always a full generosity, let's say, to sharing data by those that hold data. Everything from insurance to private sector companies that collect data, and governments as well. So even though data is not worth money in itself, but it's the use you put it to where the money is. But that culture has still not opened up fully. I don't know if this is a problem here, but it's a problem in some places. So, Minister.
Thank you very much. I will leave this the private sector but for regional integration. I think that for SADC, we are very far ahead in terms of data collection and also the way we disseminate the information to the member states. And I think that this also is good for private sector, because when we inform, not so private sector, but the community itself, when we inform about inflation in the region or exchange rate in the region, we are dealing with someone wealth, because you can become poor because your currency, the local currency, depreciated. So you have less income. So we have this one, and I think that for private sector they need this information to see how they can move their capital to another country, taking into account this information. But of course, these new aspects of natural disaster needed to be incorporated in this data statistic. And I agree with you that we can save money and time using the existing mechanism to solve that. On Premier, someone was saying is the same. Premier, I think that for Africa and the peasant, for the peasant, I think that for cash crop, there's no problem, because you have a big company that is operating in that area. So the big company will take insurance and help. For example, take let's say index data, and then he can help the community living around the company within his social responsibility. He can do that. The problem is how you set up insurance for individual. That's the big problem. Again, for cooperative, it's easier. But the problem is you have a split present, and it's very complicated too. For informal sector, I think that it's more than taking insurance. The problem is the policy in terms of insurance policy, legislation. They're equal everywhere. It's uniform. So we don't have policy or legislation that is adequate for African culture. There's no. You want to take risk as an insurance company. You want to take risk, and then you have to reinsure that risk. We have to deal with the international. So I think maybe if we wanted to promote this, we have to see our legislation, adequate our legislation to culture. I just give him an example of housing, for example. The concept of housing in Africa is quite different. But to prepare or to get insurance, housing insurance, you have to be sure that you have architecture, you have everything in place. So definitely, we do have house, but we don't have house for insurance because it's not adequate for this international standard. So again, we have to see that. But I think also that we can solve the problem. One, if we have an informal sector operating in the market, small market, the micro finance can be helpful for them. But if you want to see someone who is selling on the street, maybe the licensing, when you give him a license, you include the premium for 1 year, for one capital, let's say 20 or 100,000 US dollar. And then you insure license, and he pay, because he will think that he's paying for the license, but you included insurance. Maybe that will be the way forward. Otherwise, it will be very complicated to find someone, because you say, okay, I paid the premium, but in 2 years' time, never happened, nothing. So I'm spending money for nothing. I want something happen, and you say, no, this is not happening because you have insurance. Because once you leave, once you leave insurance, that will come. So please be patient and pay it. So we have to convince them on that. So we have experience now. I think this cell phone company is signing an agreement with this national risk disaster management to facilitate, contact. And then today in Mozambique, is easier to provide information to those on the rural area before 72 hours of floods. So they have mechanisms that they can get that. And seven days if the drought is coming. So this is something that the information are coming. Lastly, I think that for private sector, PPP on this area, I think that's for big company, big investment, you don't have problem because you have MIGA, you have everything. So you give them license, but at the same time you say, okay, we're not saying that you are running very high government risk, but it's better to have MIGA, it's better to have everything rather than trying to set up your project and rely on what we are offering. So I think that is one way of PPP, because for business they go to normal insurance company. But again, when you get all risk for Africa, all risk mean nothing, because the risk that you want to be covered is not there. What happened? Flags, natural disaster is not there. So you pay a higher premium, but at the same time you're not, seeing the result. But I think that for this private sector and business, they have to prepare business plan. To prepare business plan, they collect data and they understand what they are. Even the insurance company, they have their own actual, studies, so they have no problem with that. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, private participation is, I believe, it's very important in all the process here. If you take the Mexican example or the Mexican experience, when we started Fonden, we don't have a lot of private participation. In 2011, for example, we only have 10 participants when we were trying to place our policy, our insurance for that year. This year we have 32 participants. So we are getting more and more participation of the private sector and more interest once the vehicle is there and it has shown more track record in what it's doing. In terms of the informality, the problem is that sometimes the programs, the public programs that we have, live better or have they are better suited with informality than with the informal sector than with the formal sector, and then your programs tend to maintain the condition of informality of people, and actually your program should be something that gives the incentive for people to become formal. So, for example, now what we are doing is we are giving for people that turn from informality to the formal sector, we are giving incentives to buy insurance, to have security, to have other type of benefits that the government can give you, but if you become formal. So that's something that is in the process. And by the end of the day, what I would want to say is that the private sector, if it sees an opportunity and if the market is there, it will enter. There are some problems, obviously, but at the end of the day, having persistence and having track record in what you are doing will give you access to the private sector, and you can have a bigger program that can attend more people in your community.
Can we conclude that we see the private sector as part of the solution and not the problem? Okay, good. I will pass now to Sabir. There was a lot of questions about limitations and use of insurance. Yes.
I see 000 on the clock. Yeah, I just try and tie it up. I think informality, scale, all of these issues. I mean, there is a critical challenge for microinsurance, which is regulation. And when you say private-public partnership, I think if we can look at developing more inclusive regulation, which allows many of these grassroots organizations to enter into the formal insurance market, there's more chance you're going to get value-based driven insurance products that really hit what the poor actually need. And one of the examples I'd just like to quickly give is the Philippines, where they have introduced microinsurance regulation and have enabled mutual organizations to develop insurance products for the low-income population. One of our members now, after initially being organized 20 years ago as an informal insurance scheme for coconut farmers, is now covering 2 million individuals, which is 11 million households with insurance products. And these are all low-income population. And they're one of the first ones. The name is Card MBA. Some of you may have heard of it. It's one of the first ones which responds when a disaster occurs. Regulation also allows access to reinsurance, which is really critical, because if you don't have the scale, you really need the reinsurance to help you provide the additional products which the people need. It's a long-term strategic process to build up an insurance scheme. In Africa, we have different experiences. We have in West Africa health mutuals. We have in East Africa, we have the SACCOs who have developed their own insurance schemes, the trade unions in Kenya, in Ghana. So these are well-established mainstream insurance companies. In North Africa, we have the agricultural-based cooperatives who have developed their own insurance schemes as well. So it's different experiences, but one big challenge is the regulation. And from our point, it will be important to see more governments and more regulators taking an open mind to having inclusive regulation.
As Sabir pointed out, we are seriously over time. My apologies as a moderator, I haven't done a good job. But I want to give Peter and Christophe and Fatima 1 word each. What's your main recommendation?
Yes, because I've been working on this now for 4 years to try and see how it integrates, I have got answers to all the questions. So maybe if you come up and... But one really important one is that if you have an open source platform that's used across a region, then actually you automatically start integrating the whole thing. And you can have data standards. And in Europe, we've already done it. If you didn't know, there's something called Inspire, which is a legally required data system for every country in Europe. And you could easily adopt this in sub-Saharan Africa. And the way to do that is understood, and there's a lot of experience that could be drawn on. But the point I really wanted to make about private sector is that my experience with this model is if you have a fund and a platform and a collaboratory, the private sector jump at it because they want access to capital. And the capital comes from the fund to spend in improving resilience of their businesses and the community, which gives them better businesses in the future. So actually, my experience is they all jump at it. We'll put our data in here because actually we're going to get access to capital as a result. And that's a very powerful motivation, actually.
Thank you. I heard an offer there to Sadek.
Overall, I'm very positive and encouraged. I mean, first of all, the comments were very kind of spot on. I mean, I think the technology advances help us to look at new models, also from the private sector becoming a player. IT plays a role. I think the issue on informality is very important. And so my big kind of message would be, please, let's focus on all of the priorities of the Sendai framework. When we're just looking at one aspect of data or insurance, I mean, we also should not forget that all the things cost. I mean, insurance is not free, and the concept of the insurance is not made for that. So we have only kind of limited kind of application for this. It's very encouraging to see all kind of new models, but it's a kind of broader discussion. And at the end, we're having cultural issues, as you said, Mr. Minister. There are other things. So my kind of big message would be, please, let's focus on all the priorities of the Sendai framework. That only helps to address the kind of aspects from a more comprehensive way.
Thank you. Fatima, a final word from you.
Thanks, Margareta. I think it's estimated that disasters, in terms of losses, between 3 to 15% of annual losses of our GDPs. And I think that's a really significant amount of monies. And you can just imagine what you could do with that types of money. So I think we should also think about how disaster risk and the financing of disaster risk could be embedded or integrated into our foreign direct investments, across all the chain of foreign direct investment in terms of investment ventures, planning, and looking at areas that are especially, climate sensitive or disaster prone areas. Yeah, thank you.
So thank you all. Given the time, I will not summarize, but I think you just heard the panel summarizing. And just to say, there is a lot going on that doesn't meet the eye. In Americas, there is a network of ministers of finance that are working hard on exactly what Fatima called for. And I think maybe we can organize that there is a meeting between the ministers of finance in Africa and the Americas to discuss these issues. Maybe. So with that, I'd like to close. I think there are people outside who want to get into this room, but thank you for staying with it, and take it with you and make use of what was said.